Okay, now the factors which affect weathering, as I was saying, the first one is the properties of the rocks. Now we know that different rocks have different minerals, and these minerals vary in their stability. Some rocks are more stable and some rocks aren't. And if you see, the minerals are soluble. Okay, some of the minerals are soluble because of which they are weathered very fast, they are broken down very fast. So that is the first one. Because of the properties of the rocks also, weathering varies. Those rocks which have minerals which are soluble are broken down faster. So that's point number one. Number two we have is porosity. Porosity of rocks. Some rocks absorb water, and when these rocks absorb water, or when the water collects in the rocks, what happens is at night time, in cold places, the water is turned into ice. And when that happens, the volume of the water increases, ice increases, and thereby the rocks are broken down. So that is how also, because of the porosity of the rocks also, rocks are broken down because of the action of frost. That's number two. Number three we have is strength of the rocks. Size of the rocks, or the strength. That means bigger the rocks, the stronger it will be, and therefore it will take a longer time for the rocks to be weathered, or it will take a longer time for weathering to take place because of the huge size of the rocks. But if the rocks are small in size, then weathering will take a shorter time. That means the rocks will get weathered or broken down very, very fast. Then we have point number four is topography. Topography also affects the weathering. If you see in high altitude regions, for instance the frost action which I told you, because of ice also, rocks are broken down, weathering takes place. In the high altitude regions where it is very moist, where a lot of moisture is there, what happens there? The rocks are broken down faster. See? That is because of the topography also. Number five we have is climate. Climate is also another factor which determines weathering. If you go to the deserts, what happens is because of the intense temperature, high temperature, the rocks break down very fast. See, in very hot regions, what happens is chemical weathering also takes very fast. Chemical reaction takes place very fast, whereby the rocks are broken down. So climate is also another very important aspect which is responsible for causing weathering. Then we have plants and animal activity. Plants are also responsible for breaking down the rocks, because when the plants grow, the roots go into the ground, and these roots which go into the ground will absorb, no doubt they absorb water, but then more importantly as they absorb water, the roots grow in search of water, and the size of the roots also grow in size. They become bigger and bigger, and these roots, the roots of these plants can break the rocks that are there under the ground. So plants are also responsible for weathering. Animals which make burrows, which dig under the ground, like rats, rabbits and so on. What happens is these also are responsible for breaking down the rocks. So therefore plant and animal activity is also one of the aspects for breaking down rocks. Then we have also because of pollution. See, nitrogen and sulfur bearing gases in the atmosphere combined with water form strong and corrosive acids like sulfuric and nitric acid, which can break the rocks down. So because of pollution also, rocks are broken down, thereby causing weathering. Now let's see a little bit more the types of weathering. Let's see the types of weathering. Types of weathering. Weathering types. Okay, types of weathering. The first one which we have is the mechanical or physical weathering. Number one. Mechanical or physical weathering. Mechanical or physical weathering. Okay. Weathering. Now, this mechanical or physical weathering mainly takes place because of two aspects. One is temperature and the other one is frost action. Now let's go to the first one, that is temperature. How does the rocks break down because of temperature? This mostly happens in the desert regions. When the sun shines during the daytime, the rocks expand. And at night time what happens? Because of the cold temperature, again the rocks contract. So again the next day the sun shines and the rocks expand. Again night comes, the rocks contract. So because of this continuous expansion and contraction during day and night, summer and winter, what happens is ultimately the rocks are broken down. The rocks are broken down, whereby causing weathering. So we can have a block disintegration taking place as well. Rocks are broken down. Or for instance, because of the high temperature, what happens is during daytime and the very low temperature during night time, what happens? The rocks ultimately break down, whereby the rocks are broken down to smaller size, called even granular disintegration. When the rocks are broken down to small size like grains, it's called as granular disintegration, because the rocks are broken down to small sizes, because of the difference in the high and low temperature. Now the rocks also can be broken down because of a process called as exfoliation. Now this is when the rocks are not good conductors of heat. When the sun shines, the outer part of the rocks expand. In some of the rocks which are not very good conductors of heat, what happens when the sun shines? The direct sunlight falls on the rocks, whereby the outer part of the rocks expand more and less in the inner side. Again night time what happens? It comes when the temperature is very cold, it contracts during night time. Again next time the temperature is high, again it expands. So because of the continuous expansion and contraction of the outer layer of the rocks, what happens is the rocks start to break out in layers, which is called as exfoliation. It's like, when you peel an onion, the onion comes out in layers, somewhat like that. When the rocks also break down in this process, it is called as exfoliation. That is because of the unequal heating of the rocks, whereby the rocks are broken out in layers called as exfoliation. Okay, so therefore because of the difference in temperature, we have rocks which are broken down. They are broken down in the process called as granular disintegration, small sizes. They are broken down also in the process called as block disintegration, where the rocks are broken down like blocks. Or they are also taken out in the process called as exfoliation, where they are taken out in layers. This is how the rocks are broken down by the process called as by the temperature, broken down by the temperature, whereby causing weathering. Now how does the rocks break because of frost action? Now this happens in the very cold places. What happens is, sometimes in some of the rocks, what happens is when the rainwater falls, the water collects in these small holes that are there in the rocks. And then what happens, because this is a very cold region where it snows, what happens during night time? The temperature drops down very low, and therefore this water is turned into ice. And when this water which has been collected in the rocks turn into ice, the volume increases, whereby pressure is applied to all sides, and therefore this rock is cracked open. There's a small crack created because of the increase in the volume of the water after it's turned into ice. Then next day what happens, when the sun shines, this ice melts, and after this ice melts, this water will go into the crack further inside. It goes further inside the crack. After the water has gone into the crack further inside, again night time comes, again this water is turned into ice, again the volume increases, again whereby pressure is created, and whereby the crack becomes bigger. Next day again the water turns into ice, ice turns into water, and it goes further inside. Again the night time the same process comes. Ultimately what happens is the rocks are broken down. The rocks are broken down, see? Whereby we even have what is called as a block disintegration taking place. The rocks are totally broken apart. See, that is because of the frost action. So this is how also the frost or ice that we say can also break down the rocks, whereby causing weathering. So this is how mechanical and physical weathering takes place. The first one. The second one which we have is the chemical weathering. Second one. Number two we have is the chemical weathering. Chemical weathering. Now how does this chemical weathering take place? This chemical weathering basically takes place because of the chemical reaction that has taken place in the rocks, whereby the rocks are broken down. We know that different rocks have different minerals. So when these minerals come in contact with the atmospheric air or come in contact with the air, water, what happens is a chemical reaction takes place whereby the rock starts to break down. So when this happens, it is called as chemical weathering. So the first one, I'll just discuss some points. The first one we have is oxidation. How does the rocks break down? By the process called as oxidation. Now in this process called as oxidation, what happens is basically rusting takes place. We know that when we throw a piece of iron sheet on the outside, after some months when you look at the iron sheet, it is rusted. Rusting has taken place. A chemical reaction has taken place whereby the tin sheet has rusted. Same thing happens here with the rocks also. We know that some rocks have iron in it. So when these rocks, which have minerals like iron in it, comes in contact with the rainwater and oxygen of the atmosphere, of the environment, what happens? A chemical reaction takes place whereby the rainwater along with the oxygen mixes with the iron that is present in the rocks, whereby a chemical reaction takes place within the rocks and the rock starts to rust, and ultimately rusting takes place whereby breaking down the rocks. This is how we have this process called as oxidation taking place, whereby the rocks are broken down. It is a process whereby oxygen, the rainwater and the iron present in the rocks have a chemical reaction, where we have a chemical reaction taking place, whereby the rusting takes place and the rocks are broken down. Number one, oxidation. Number two we have is carbonation. Now how does the rocks break down? By the process called as carbonation. Now in this process what happens is basically the carbon dioxide that is present in the air and atmosphere mixes with the rainwater, and when the rainwater falls down, it mixes with the carbon dioxide, and this rainwater is turned into carbonic acid. It is turned into carbonic acid. So what happens is this carbonic acid which falls on the rocks, whereby what happens? A chemical reaction will take place in the rock whereby the rocks are broken down. For instance, we have rocks like limestone, marble and chalk. Limestone, marble and chalk. Okay, limestone, marble and chalk. So what happens is in carbonation, the rainwater will mix with the carbon dioxide of the atmosphere, whereby the rainwater is turned into carbonic acid, and this carbonic acid falls on the on the rocks, whereby the rocks are broken down. Examples we have is limestone, marble and chalk, whereby the rocks are broken down. So this is because of the process called as carbonation, whereby rocks like marble, limestone are broken down. That is carbonation. Third one we have is called the process called as hydration. Now in this process hydration, what happens is hydrogen that is present in the atmosphere and water, hydrogen that is present in the water and air reacts with certain type of rocks, whereby breaking them down. That means, once again I repeat, in this process hydration, the hydrogen that is present in the air or in the water will mix with certain type of rocks, whereby a chemical reaction takes place, whereby the rocks are broken down. For instance, the change of feldspar into kaolin. Change of feldspar into kaolin. Sorry, it's kaolin. Kaolin. So you can see here, see, in this third one, the change of feldspar into kaolin is an example of hydration. That means in hydration, the hydrogen will mix with water and air. The hydrogen that is present in the water and air will mix with certain type of minerals that are present in the rocks, whereby a chemical reaction takes place whereby the rocks are broken down. The example is the change of feldspar into kaolin is an example. Then I'll do the one more part, that is solution. Solution is also called as, the third one is also called as dissolution or leaching. Solution. Now in this process solution, what happens is the rainwater that falls on certain type of rocks will break down the rocks. When the rainwater falls on certain type of rocks, it is broken down. Examples: rock salt and gypsum. When rainwater falls on certain type of rocks like rock salt and gypsum, the rocks are broken down. Rock salt. When rainwater falls on certain type of rocks like rock salt and gypsum, it is broken down whereby the process of solution takes place. So this is how we have the chemical weathering taking place because of oxidation, because of carbonation, because of hydration, and because of solution. These four. Now I will go one more further and do the last part of this weathering here. That is number 3, biological weathering. Biological weathering. Now what is biological weathering? Biological weathering is basically the weathering caused by plants, animals and human activities. When the rocks are broken down, when weathering takes place because of the plants, when weathering takes place because of the animals, and when weathering takes place because of the human activities, it is called as biological weathering. Okay, biological weathering. So let's see the first one, plants. Now we know that when the plants grow, the roots go deep into the ground, and these roots that go deep into the ground sometimes goes through the cracks of the rocks. And in course of time, when the roots grow bigger in size, the rocks start to crack even more, furthermore, ultimately breaking down the rocks. So that is how the plants also cause weathering. That means the roots of the plants, when they go in search of water under the ground, sometimes they happen to go through the cracks of the rocks, and in course of time what happens, the roots grow in size and ultimately the rocks are broken down, whereby weathering is caused. Now weathering also takes place because of the animals. Animals. Like we have animals like, for instance, the burrowing animals like rats, then we have rabbits, we even have bears. See, what happens is these animals live under the ground or make holes under the ground, or burrows the land, make burrows under the ground. And when they dig under the ground, what happens is, in course of this process, what happens, they break down the rocks. As they make burrows under the ground, or as they make tunnels under the ground, or as they dig under the ground, what happens? They start to break down the rocks, whereby what happens? The biological weathering takes place. Then we have the third one, that is human activities. Human activities are also responsible for breaking down the rocks. In fact, the major cause, if you see the way in which the development is taking place, the rat race that's going on in this world, everyone wants to construct building of dams, roads, big factories, construction malls, see, malls, then industries, houses, towns. What happens is a huge scale of weathering takes place. Rocks are broken down, landscape is changed, whereby what happens? Biological weathering takes place. So human beings are also responsible, majorly responsible for causing biological weathering. So these are the different types of weathering that we would like to discuss today, dear students. And the remaining part of this chapter we'll do in the next class. So I do hope you will pay attention as you go through the video and then try to understand whatever has been taught. And next class we'll come with the remaining part of this chapter and discuss and teach you as well what is there in the lesson. So till then, thank you very much. Stay safe and be good.